Today I'm gonna authenticate my Spring Boot and React application with Google, but using an identity provider, using AWS Cognito. I've already done a video about authenticating a Spring Boot application with Google, but there was a lot of custom configuration because Google has some extra security concerns. Having an identity provider, I can use a regular Auth2 workflow with it, and the IDP will do whatever is needed with Google or any other authentication provider, like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, or Microsoft. AWS Cognito is an interface to all the social sign-in systems, like Google, Facebook, or Apple. This means that I only configure my application to use AWS Cognito to authenticate my users. The social sign-in system I want to use, it's a matter of configuration in AWS. My application won't need any change. How works the authentication workflow? First, my frontend displays a link to the login page. This link is generated with the Auth2 Cognito information. Once the user clicks, he is redirected to the Cognito login page. Here all the social sign-in buttons will be displayed, and a free form for an email and password. Once Cognito validates the user's credentials, it calls a callback URL of my frontend with a code. The frontend sends now the code to the backend. As all the Cognito information is in the backend, the frontend has nothing to do with the code. The backend validates the code against Cognito, and Cognito sends a JWT. Then the JWT is sent back to the frontend. Now the frontend must send the JWT on each request that needs authentication. Spring Security will read this JWT and validate it against Cognito. I know there is a lot of common go with many systems, so let's see the complete workflow in a single picture. The generation of the Cognito's URL. Cognito validates the user's credentials. Once authenticated, Cognito calls a callback URL with a code. The frontend sends the code to the backend. The backend validates the code against Cognito. Cognito returns a JWT. The frontend receives and stores the JWT. For each request made to the backend, the frontend must now send the JWT in the authorization mirror header. Let's start by configuring Google with an Auth2 client. But first, subscribe to my channel. It's a single click on the button below. Do you see it? Let's start in the GCP console to create my client application where the users will sign in. I go to the API and services, and inside I go to the auth consent screen. As I've already configured it, the screen is already activated, but let's see the options. The app name is the one that will be displayed in the login screen. Here are some emails, URLs which describe the client application, the client website. In the next screen, I must make sure to select the following scopes: user info email, user info profile, and OpenID. As it's a test application, I have to manually add the allowed users. It's like the beta testers. And that's it. Let's continue now with the credentials tab. Here I will create a new credentials, the client ID credentials. Those credentials are for Cognito, to allow Cognito to connect to the dev world login page. I choose the client ID and select Web Application. I put a technical name, let's say Cognito Client. And now the important part. Who is going to make the request and where do I need to redirect after the login? Cognito. From which URLs? This one. HTTPS. Cognito IDP, the region where I will create my Cognito user pool, Europe West 1 and Amazon AWS.com. And the redirect URL is the same with Auth2 IDP response. That's a standard URL, and hit create. That's all on the Google side. Let's now write some code. I will create a small frontend. I will create a homepage which displays public and private content. Let's go. npx create nx workspace at latest with the name frontend. Let's proceed. Yes. I create a React project with no framework a standalone project with Webpack, no end-to-end tests, with SCSS. I will configure the CI later. Would you like remote caching? No. And that's it. It installs all the dependencies and creates the project. Okay, let's now add some libraries. I go into my frontend project. Here are the files and I type npm install mobx. This is to manage the store. Let's add another one, npm install react router done. This is to manage different URLs. And the last one, npm install react bootstrap. And this is to have pretty components. And I also need to install bootstrap. Install bootstrap. Let's turn to VS Code and create some components. Let's zoom in. Okay, that's cool. I will create the first folder for login page, another one for protect page. The login page will display the login button, the protect page will display protected information, redirect page to accept the auth2 callback from Cognito, and the last one, welcome page, to display the login button and some public information. Let's add the files, export function, login page, and we'll just create some empty component, export default login page, and save it as login page tsx. And now copy the same one to protect, redirect, and welcome. Rename them protect page, redirect page, and welcome page. Let's correct to the export, protect. This is the welcome, and this is the redirect. Okay, those are empty components, but it's okay for now. By default, a React application is all managed in a single URL. All is loaded in a single HTML file, a single JS file, and a single CSS file. If I want to use the router dependency and have many URLs, I need to edit the Webpack config. Let's go to Webpack Configuration, where it is here, and I add to the output the public path, which is the root. And in the dev server, I have history API fallback, which is true. I save. Now, to use Bootstrap in my application, I need to import it in the main.js file. Let's open it. In the main tsx, I import bootstrap dist css bootstrap min.ds. This way, Bootstrap is imported in all the project. Let's now configure the different routes. First of all, I have to tell that my application will be managed by browser router. So, instead of strict mode, I use browser router. And now, in the app component, I remove the welcome and add the routes. I first add some class name here to manage this component, center a div. I add a title, welcome to my awesome website. And now the routes. I add the import, quick fix. The first route is at the path route, and the element will be welcome page. The next one is the login, and it will use the login page. I add the import. The next one is private and show the protected content. Protected. And the last one is the auth IDP response, which is the redirect component. That's it. So let's start the project and add some style to the main component. To start the project, I type yarn start. Let's now open a browser and edit the CSS to add some style. Here is my website and the code. I will add an SCSS file to the app component. New file app.scss. Import it. Import app.scss. And now let's add some style. First, in the body, I add no margin, a height, a fixed height, and display flex. Align all the items to the center and justify the content to the center. Finally, I add a background color, a dark one. Okay, here is my title. Let's now use the centered div class I've added before. This time the background color will be a light one. A white one. I add some padding, 20 pixels. Okay, better. I will add some border radius, 10 pixels. I want the max width to be at 90% of the parent and the max height the 90% too. And the overflow will be auto. Okay, that's it. Let's now add some content to the welcome page. As the default one is the welcome page, I first add some text. Login first to see private content. I add a button, login, and another one to show the private content. And the footer, by the way, the servers says with the public content, but those are bootstrap buttons. Let's import them. Okay, let's see the result. Here it is. Let's go back to the SCSS to add some margin to the buttons. All the button will have a margin right of 10 pixels and a margin on the bottom of 30 pixels. Yeah, better. So what is the content of my backend? I will create a variable, a use state variable. Content, set content, use state, which is empty by default. I import the use state and use it here. Content. It changes nothing. Let's now add some behavior to the buttons. When I click on the login page, it will switch to the login component, and when I click on the private content, it will switch to the private component. For that, I will import navigate. Use navigate, and now on click, navigate to login, which is the URL I've configured in the app component, and the same for the private. Now, if I click, it redirects to the login component, but it's empty for now. But I have the URL which was modified. And same for the private content. And the last one, I will call the backend to display the content of my public endpoint. For that, I use the useEffect hook. I import it. I will create an HTTP service which fetches the URL public, and the response will be transformed into JSON content, and the data will be used in the set content. Let's say message. Okay. It has an error because the HTTP service wasn't created yet. Let's create the HTTP service. So, new file http service.ts, export const http service, which has the fetch method asynchronous with the URL and some options. The HTTP args and return a promise of any. Return a weight of the fetch command with the URL of my backend, HTTP localhost 8080, with the URL of the parameter and the options. I keep the options just to handle the HTTP method and other options. Let's export it, default HTTP service. And now in the welcome page I can import that. Okay, I have no error, but I still need to create this type HTTP args. So let's go create a new file, types.ts, and here I export an interface, the HTTP args, with the URL as a string and the options which are optional. I may have the method, which is a string, the body, which is a string, the headers, which is anything, and that's it. Let's come back to the HTTP service and import that. Okay, but now it fails to fetch the backend because I didn't create the backend yet. I will comment this part so I can continue editing my frontend. Here it is. Let's continue with the login page. Login page. Here I will just display a button, sign in with Google. It's a bootstrap button. Here it is. What does this button? On click, I want to load another URL. Window, location, href, which is the Cognito URL. This will be a variable Cognito URL set Cognito URL user state empty by default. What's wrong here? Okay, better. And this Cognito URL comes from the backend. Use effect. So I need to call the HTTP service, fetch with the URL, which is auth URL, and the response. Then I parse again to JSON data, response JSON, and the data. I set the Cognito URL data.url. I have again the error because I don't have the backend. Let's continue with another component, the protected component. Private content. So let's continue. What does display the protected component? First, a title, protected content, which is the server says and the content. This is a variable. Content, set content, and use state. Empty by default. I add the import, and again I call the backend. Let's copy from the login page, but the URL is private. Set content, data, message. Okay, I import use effect, I import the HTTP service, and that's it. As I have no backend, this displays an error. But for the private content, I need to send some authentication information. I will need the headers, the authenticate headers. So I will create another method, fetch with auth, and let's go to the HTTP service creating this method. I will copy the same content, but now I have the options with auth, which is the previous options with a new header. Let's take the previous headers to options, headers, and the authorization header with the bearer content, which comes from the App Store, auth token. And use this constant instead. So this constant extends the options received in the input parameter and adds the authorization header. This authorization header has the JWT from the store. So I need to create the store to save the JWT. A new file, app store.ts. Export const app store app store, the interface, and it's an observable with the field auth token by default null, and I export it. Export default app store. Let's create this interface. In the types, export interface app store, which has only one field, which is a string or a null. I import it. Here it is. And finally, I need the action to store the token. A new file, app actions.ts. Export const app actions set auth token, which is an action this time. I have as input parameter the token as a string, and it returns void. I call the store and I save the token. Export default app actions. Okay, I have the App Store, I have the HTTP service, and I have the app actions. The App Store will save my token, the HTTP service will request my backend, and the app actions will manage the store. I need just one last page, the redirect page, where I receive the code and store the JWT. Let's go to the redirect page. Trying to log in. And what do I show? First, navigate. Navigate. Because at the end of the callback, I redirect to the private page. Now I use effect. First, I read the URL code. Const URL params URL search params from window location search. This reads the query parameters. And I read the value of code. URL parameters get code. Now I request the HTTP service URL auth callback with the code. Then the response, I transform it in JSON. Then the data, I store the JWT, which is the response, with the actions. Set auth token and the data, I read the field token. At the end, I navigate to the private page. Replace true. Okay, what's the error in the HTTP service? I think I need to import that. That's it. That's all on the React side. Let's create the backend now. I will use Spring Initializer to create the project. As the group, com.serger.auth2. As the artifact, backend. And now I select the jar packaging, Java 21, Maven project, and the Spring Boot version. Let's add some dependencies. Web, security, and resources server. Here they are. I hit on generate. Once downloaded, I open it with IntelliJ. Okay, here it is. Let's start creating some packages to separate my application. Package controllers, package configs, and package DTOs. Let's start with the controllers. Public controller, REST controller with a get mapping / public. Public, it returns a response entity of message DTO. Public message. Let's create this record into the DTOs package. It just contains a string message. That's how I've named it in the frontend. And now return response entity, okay, of a new message. How are you? Let's continue with the private controller. Private controller. Again, it's a REST controller with a get mapping / private. It returns also a response entity of message. DTO private message. Return response, okay, of new message. But this time, as I have my user authenticated, I will say hello with the name of the user authenticated. But I need the authentication principal annotation to fetch the user's information with the JWT from Google. Inside the JWT, I read the claims. I read only one claim, which is the name. The JWT is an object where I can read all the properties of the decrypted JWT. Name is one of those properties. I will show later the complete decrypted JWT. Let's continue now with the course configuration. I will put all of this in the security config. Component, I start with course configuration, source, new course configuration, I set the allowed origins, arise list with my frontend, HTTP localhost 4200. I also add the methods set allowed method arise list. I allow the get and the post and the options. And finally, I allow the headers arise as list with the authorization header and the content type. And now I return the configuration. New URL based configuration source, register all the routes, the configuration, and I return the source. That's it. Now I configure Spring Security. I add the enable web security annotation. No, not component, it's configuration. And let's start. Security filter chain security with the HTTP security. I start by adding the course configuration. Say configuration course. I need to add the exception to the signature. Okay. I will disable the CSRF. Exception handling. I will just return an unauthorized code. See, authenticate entry point, new HTTP entry point, status unauthorized. Now the session management, session creation policy. I will use a stateless application. And finally, the authorization routes. Authorize. I have authorize request matches on auth everything on inside and public and everything inside. I permit all. With HTTP options, all the endpoints I permit all, and the rest of the requests must be authenticated. And finally, the Auth2 resources server configuration. I use a JWT with a customizer with defaults and return HTTP build. That's it. As a resources server, Spring Security needs some information about the authorization server, as the URL where to validate the code and obtain the JWT. So let's go to the project. In the resources, I use an application YAML file. Spring Security Auth2 resources server JWT set URI and issue URI. What URLs do I need to put over there? I will set them later. Let's continue with the authentication controller. Authentication controller. REST controller with get mapping, auth URL. I need two endpoints in the authentication controller to generate the URL and to request the JWT from a code. The first one, this one, is to generate the URL, the Cognito URL. Public response entity of URL DTO. It returns a record into the package DTOs with just one field URL. Okay, string URL, which is the Cognito URL URI. Let's create this variable. And I add those to authorize with the response type, which is code, and the client ID, and the redirect URI, which is the frontend URI 420002 IDP response, and the scope, which is email, OpenID, and profile. Return the response entity. Okay, with the new URL. Here it is. I will read those values, the Cognito URI and the client ID, from the application YAML file. I add the value, string security, to resource server JWT client ID, and this one from auth Cognito URI. Let's go to the application YAML. Here I add the client ID, and here I add Cognito URI. I will add those values later when I create the Cognito user pool. And now the last endpoint to validate the code and request the JWT. Get mapping auth callback. Public response entity of token DTO. This time I return a token. Let's create the record. String token. First I read the query parameter request. Param, which is the code. String code. Now I must validate this code with Cognito. So I build the Cognito URL. Cognito auth2 token with the parameters grant type, which is authorization code, and the client ID, which is client ID, and the code, which is the input variable, and the last one, the redirect URI, which is the same as this one. Now I need to authenticate this request. Authentication info, which is the client ID plus the client secret, separated with 2 points. Let's create this variable. In the application. This authentication information, I need to encode it in base 64. Get encoder, encode to string, authentication information, get bytes. Basic authentication. Let's now request the Cognito URI. HTTP request new builder with the URI URL string with the header, content type, application, x www form URL encoded, with the header, authorization, basic plus the basic authentication. So run with try catch, and finally it's a post HTTP request with nobody. Build in the request. I save it into a variable, and now HTTP client, I create the client and I send the request HTTP response body handlers into a string response. So run with a try catch, if the response, the status code is different from 2000, I throw an exception, authentication failed. And finally, I need to read the string of the response. Let's create the JSON mapper, private static final object mapper, new object mapper. Take the mapper and read the value response body, and all of this into a class named Cognito token response DTO. Let's create this record. The first thing, the most important here, is to include JSON ignore properties, because it may have some properties that I don't know, so I want to ignore them if they are new properties. And which are the properties I need? ID token. There are more, but I don't care about the others. What's the error? I need to indicate the class. Okay, so run with a try catch. And finally, return the response entity, okay, with a new token DTO, ID token. That's it. I have now the Google side ready, the React side ready, and the backend part ready. I must go to AWS and configure AWS Cognito to connect with my Google client and get all the Auth2 information to my backend. Let's go to Cognito and create a new user pool. I select federated ITT providers because I want to sign in with Google. I want a username and email from the authenticated users. And I select Google. Click on Next. This is the security concerns about Cognito. Let's use the default configuration. And no MFA, multi-factor authentication. Let's continue. This is for the sign up. When creating a new user, I can allow Cognito to create users if I want, users that don't have a Google account. When creating new accounts, I have the email by default, and I also choose the name. Let's click on Next. This is for sending emails to validate the account. I let Cognito send all the emails. And now comes the Google configuration. Here I passed the client ID. Let's go to the other tab where I have my client ID of Google. Here is the client ID. And here is the client secret. What are the authorized scopes? I put profile, OpenID, and email. Now I have to map the attributes from Google and Cognito. The name is the name and the email is the email. Next, I put the name of my user pool, use a Cognito domain. Here I will use the pool name I've created plus the ID of my account. Now I have to put the information about the Auth2 client of Cognito. It will be a server-side application. Let's put the name, my Cognito client. It will generate a secret. And what are the callback URLs? It will be the URL of my frontend, which is localhost 4200 auth2 IDP response. And that's it. Next, this is to review, and I click on Create User Pool. Here is my user pool. Now I can copy some information to put into my Spring Boot application. Let's first copy the Cognito URL. I go to the application YAML and pass into the JWT URI this one. And for the issuer URI, it's the same, but until the user pool. Let's now copy the client ID and the client secret. Now I have to go to the App Integration tab into my Cognito client. Here is the client ID, and now the client secret. Into the app integration, I also have the Cognito domain. Let's copy this and add it to the client ID, to the Google client ID as authorized URL. Let's save it. Let's also copy the Cognito domain to paste it into my Spring Boot application. Here I've created a variable as Cognito URI. Let's copy it. And as last modification, in the app integration, I go to my client, and below I can see that the hosted UI I have the following scopes: email, OpenID and phone. Those are the default scopes, but what I want is the email, OpenID and profile. Let's edit them. I remove phone and I select profile. Save the change. And let's now test all together. Here is my frontend started and my backend is started too. Let's inspect the network. When I first load the website, I have the content from the public endpoint. Here it is, public, and the response. Message, how are you? If I try to go to the private content, I have an error because the private endpoint responds an unauthorized HTTP code. Let's go back to the home page, and now I click on the login. In the login component, I have the URL request, which fetches the Cognito URL. Now, when I click on the sign in button, I have the Cognito login form. I can log in with the username and password or with Google. I will select Google. I select my account. And here it is. This is now the private URL, and it has the private endpoint with the message hello and my name. Let's make a quick recap. I've configured the Auth2 consent screen in Google. I've created an Auth2 client in Google. This one will be used by Cognito. I've created a user pool in AWS Cognito. Here I add the Google information. At the end I have another Auth2 client that I use in my Spring Security application. I've created a React application. The frontend knows nothing about the authentication. It only uses a JWT when it's available in the store. And I've created a backend with Spring Security. I've configured the backend as an Auth2 resources server. Here I configure the Auth2 information from AWS Cognito. that's all for this video. The advantage of using AWS Cognito is that I can use Google, Microsoft or Facebook Connect, and my backend and frontend won't change. They won't need any additional configuration. Cognito allows me to even authenticate users with their own username and password, with no social login. And now leave a comment with what authentication system do you think is the best, or which one are you using. Don't forget to click on the like button, subscribe to my channel, and see you soon. Bye!